imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole? Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. Tonight, again, I'm going to be spending more time diving into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, since it's coming up to the 50th anniversary. You all need to know this if you don't. It's very important information. So tonight, I'm going to be getting into some more evidence for you. And again, rather than let you all hear me bloviate, which I will, I'm going to add my 2 cents, don't you worry. I'll give you my analysis on things here and there. But I want you to hear from researchers of the past, and I want you to also hear from witnesses and other evidence that's out there as well. So I have a bunch of it. I have a ton of audio I want to get to play for you all. I'm going to try to squeeze it in here in 2 hours. Hopefully I'll be able to fit it all in. If not, I might have to do another broadcast with more evidence. Trust me, there's that much stuff out there. And again, a lot of this stuff can be downloaded for free for yourselves from the JFK Downloadable Archive section on federaljack.com. Go over there right now. Feel free to download the entire thing, anything you want. Take it. Go out and get books. I've recommended tons of good books about the Kennedy assassination before in the past. There's a ton of good books. Crossfire by Jim Marrs, JFK, the CIA, Vietnam, and the Plot to Assassinate John F. Kennedy by Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. The Secret Team, which I would also read to understand how things are done, by Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Then you have Mary's Mosaic by Peter Janey. That's a little bit further down into the rabbit hole to understand his mindset, but nonetheless, still a great book. Mary's Mosaic by Peter Janey. And then Enemy of the Truth, Sherry Feister. Me and Lee by Judith Baker. She's also got a book coming out on David Ferrie and Mafia Pilot. Go get that book. Then you have LBJ and the Conspiracy to Kill Kennedy by Joseph P. Farrell. JFK and the Unspeakable by James Douglas. There's a bunch of good ones. There's also a couple of good ones about Bobby Kennedy, who killed Bobby Kennedy, the unsolved murder of Robert F. Kennedy by Shane O'Sullivan, and also the assassination of Robert Kennedy by William Turner and John Christian. So there are a few good books out there. Actually, there's a lot of good books. Oh, also get Garrison's book on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It's called On the Trail of the Assassins. And also, for RFK, John F. Kennedy's brother, you can also get RFK Must Die by Robert Blair Kaiser, another good book. There's a ton of work out there, ladies and gentlemen, that you have not been exposed to. There's a ton of evidence that you have not been exposed to. That's just a bunch of books, and that's not the end-all, be-all list of books either. That's just a smattering of them, a small little smidgen, if you will. I suggest you do more research. Do as much research into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy as you possibly can. Remember, this is a big deal. I constantly hear, why is it a big deal 50 years later, Popeye? It's happened. It's in the past. I'm sure most of the people are dead. You're right, most of the people are dead. So why keep everything secret then? Why not allow the public to know the truth? Why lie? Why keep pushing the story that it was a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, when it was not a lone gunman? Oswald was not by himself. That's a lie. So why keep pushing these fallacies? Why make fun of people that bring up evidence? Factual evidence. Why attack them? Obviously, they still think it's important 50 years later, so maybe you should too. Kennedy's assassination was the linchpin to a lot of the things that we're dealing with today. Think about it. The Vietnam War wouldn't have happened. He would have ended that. He was going to get rid of the Federal Reserve. What's our biggest problem right now? One of them? The economy? Right? And who's at fault for that? The bankers and the Federal Reserve and our government. And who controls the government through controlling the money? The bankers that own the Federal Reserve Bank. Right? He was going to end them. He was going to end the CIA and all their crap. Drug wars. How many false flag terror events or deaths or hijackings or whatnot or whatever could have been avoided? It's amazing when you sit back and you actually think about how deep and how far this actually could have affected history as we know it. If you just think about it for a brief moment, it's pretty deep, ladies and gentlemen. So it's important that we discuss this and not forget the assassination of a president was not a lone gunman. That's just nuts to think. That's insane. To think this could be pulled off by a lone gunman is insane. Okay, if you believe Oswald did the shooting and you don't put any of the evidence to the test that's out there that says he didn't do the shooting, but say you believe the shooting story. Right? You believe the official version of the shooting. How could Oswald have covered it up? Did he have dirt on Hoover, the head of the FBI? Did he have dirt on the vice president that became the president, LBJ? Did he have connections at the CIA? Did he have connections in the Secret Service, by the way, that he could make the Secret Service stand down during the shooting? Really? Think about it for a minute. Logically, use your brain, damn it. You all have them. This is important. I know a lot of people, it's not really important. It's important. It's very important. There's a lot of reasons why they'd assassinate President Kennedy and want to take him out. A lot of reasons. I'm going to play a piece of audio first for you. Many of you have heard me play this in conjunction with other stuff, but I'm going to play a piece of audio for you. It's a speech that Kennedy gave, and I want you to listen. I want you to listen to the words, okay? I want you to listen to what he's saying because it's very important. Listen to the warning he was giving out to the American public, and tell me again, when was the last time you've heard a president talk like this since President John F. Kennedy had his head blown off in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963? You haven't. There's the answer. I'll answer it for you. You haven't heard another president speak like this. So let's hear what President John F. Kennedy had to say. Here we go. President Kennedy, Take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be.
Free and independent, not enslaved and incorporated. Remember that. Let's get right into the mounds of evidence, ladies and gentlemen, because we're limited for time. So, first I want to start off with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty and his thoughts on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Now, he's got a book titled JFK. Go get it. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. I've talked about him many times. I've had Leno Seneca on talking about him. But, since Colonel Prouty is no longer alive, I figured I would play some audio from him, some of it courtesy of Leno Seneca, for you all to hear. The first is about a minute and a half long, minute and 45 long. It's him talking about what he sees as a red flag when it comes to Dealey Plaza and the Secret Service. And remember who Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty was. He was the Chief of Special Ops under President Kennedy, the first Chief of Special Ops. So he wasn't just some, guy in his basement who decided to come up with this and doesn't have any type of military background whatsoever. Okay? Just, that's important. This man's knowledge cannot just be swept away, and his analysis of things cannot just be cast aside. Prouty's the real deal. Anyway, first let's get to his thoughts on the red flag that was the Secret Service stand-down in Dealey Plaza.
What they call protection of the president is an old skill. I went to Mexico City in 1956 when President Eisenhower went to Mexico City, and by that I mean the security people went there more than a month early to look at every angle of the trip. There are rules and manuals on what we call protection. The Secret Service, that is an organization of limited size, is authorized to call any number of military people, and these are military people who are already trained to augment their forces in a case like this. There's no shortage of people. Ordinarily, a unit of military, I think was called a Special Group Number 113, would have come up from San Antonio, Texas, and would have been deployed all through the streets of Dallas, the important streets of Dallas. That was not done. In fact, the commander was specifically told he wasn't needed. You've all seen the picture of the school book building, where Oswald is supposed to have shot the president. You notice in those pictures there are open windows. If the Secret Service had been there and had done their usual job, none of those windows would have been open. And had anyone opened one of those windows at that time, they would have been on the radio, they would have had a man in that room immediately, and the window would have been closed. You see, that's protection. That didn't take place. In fact, there were no Secret Service people on the ground around Dealey Plaza that afternoon. They were told they were not needed. Instead of going straight down the street and then to the Trade Mart, he made this 90-degree turn and then another very sharp turn in front of the school book depository building. Now, the Secret Service have rules against that. The rules are that if the car is slowed down below 44 miles an hour, you must then protect it fully in other ways, such as not digressing and going around corners and all that, because when you slowed him around that corner, you opened up field of fire from three directions, behind him, to the side, and from in front, and of course he was killed right in that position.
That's right. He was killed right in that position. Nice kill box setup. Triangulation across fire. John F. Kennedy didn't stand a chance. That's why they had him turn onto Elm from Houston. That wasn't the original parade route either. They had him switch the parade route so that way he could be in that area of Dealey Plaza and the car would be slowed down to 11 miles an hour. And that's slow enough for shooters to hit him, especially in that kill box right there. That was the one spot that they knew that they could get him and make sure he didn't make it out alive, and they did exactly that. Check out my broadcasts with Vince Palomara, Secret Service expert. I've had him on multiple times talking about the stand down of the Secret Service. So go listen to them in the archives, and it's all available. Also, any of my shows I've done on the JFK assassination, the archives are available, and not only in my archive section, but if you go to the downloadable archive section, they're there, and the downloadable archive section itself, not just the Down the Rabbit Hole one, but the archive section for JFK also has all the shows I've done on John F. Kennedy's assassination in there as well. Let's see what Colonel Prouty had to say about the possibility of hired guns, hired assassins, professionals, hitmen, to take out President John F. Kennedy.
Colonel Fletcher Prouty was Chief of Special Operations of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during Kennedy's presidency. He believes even more powerful forces were ultimately responsible.
I think without any question, it's what we call the use of hired gunmen. And this isn't new. In fact, this little manual here, which is called the Assassination Manual for Latin America, contains a line which says that, talking about Latin America, if possible, professional criminals will be hired to carry out specific selective jobs in quote, which means murders. Well, if this manual for Latin America, printed within the last few years, and a government manual, says that, there's no question but what the application of the same techniques was dated back in Kennedy's time. In fact, I know that from my own experience. I was in that business in those days. So, with that knowledge, you begin to realize that hired criminals, the way this book says, can be hired by anybody in power with sufficient money to pay them, but more importantly, with sufficient power to operate the cover-up ever after. Because you see, there's one thing to kill somebody. It's another thing to cover up the fact that you did it or that you hired somebody to do it. And that's more difficult. So they use the device of the Warren Commission report to cover up their hired killers. Now, who would hire the killers? And who has the power to put the Warren Commission report out over the top of the whole story? You see, you're dealing with a very high echelon of power. It doesn't necessarily reside in any government. It doesn't necessarily reside in any single corporate institution, but it seems to reside in a blend of the two. Otherwise, how could you have gotten people like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to participate in the cover-up, the police in Dallas to participate in the cover-up, etc., and the media? All the media, not just one or two newspapers, but none of them will print the story that other than Oswald killed the president with 3 bullets, something that's absolutely untrue.
So there you have a former chief of special operations telling you that Oswald did not do the shooting, that the official story is a lie, that the mainstream media is in on it. So remember that when you're watching all these 50th anniversary specials that are being played on television the past few weeks. They're all outrageous lies. Every single one of them. You just heard a former chief of special operations tell you that the official story of Oswald hitting him with 3 bullets is a lie. They can't even get their story straight. I saw them talking about the Kennedy assassination the other day. I think it was CNN or CBS, was either one of the two. And the person talking said that Connolly was hit by multiple bullets. Really? Maybe you should go read and he was pushing the official version. He wasn't pushing a conspiracy theory. He was pushing the official version. Connolly wasn't hit multiple times by multiple rounds in the official version. They can't even get their story straight. They don't know. These people that are talking to you on television, they don't know. They have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. None whatsoever. They haven't got the slightest clue. They're reading off a teleprompter typed up by somebody who probably has no clue, because none of them were alive, I'm willing to bet. I'm willing to bet none of the producers at these TV networks were even alive on these TV shows. I'm willing to bet none of them were alive when Kennedy was assassinated. I'm willing to bet most of the news anchors weren't alive. Maybe some of the older ones. They might have been much, much younger at the time. But I'm willing to bet most of the staff at these news studios weren't even alive when Kennedy was assassinated. So they have no idea. None. They don't know the truth. They don't even have the slightest idea of what they're talking about. They're fed the information by somebody else. And of course, somebody high up the food chain that does know the truth is there to make sure what gets on and what doesn't get on. It's the way the mainstream media is. They are all in on it. Again, you just heard a former chief of special operations tell you that they are all in on it. What more evidence do you need than that? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a break coming up, so don't go anywhere. When we get back, I have more evidence from Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. We're going to get into a man named Ed Lansdale. His name seems to pop up in the Kennedy assassination as well as other conspiracies, other interesting things that the government's been up to. Interestingly enough, Lansdale's name came up recently when I was listening to an interview Nick Redfern did about a book he wrote called The Pyramids and the Pentagon, and Lansdale's name came up involved in something else, so I just thought it was interesting. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, the break is coming up. Do not go anywhere. When we get back, I have more information, as I said, about Ed Lansdale from Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty and what he was doing in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. So stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Let's get right back into it. Got some audio I want to play for you. Another clip of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, this time discussing Ed Lansdale, with a little bit of background information on Ed Lansdale, but he's discussing a picture that he saw that he recognized as Ed Lansdale. The picture was taken in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. Let's listen to what Colonel Prouty had to say, shall we?
Colonel Fletcher Prouty discusses Dealey Plaza, November 22, 1963. Colonel Prouty worked in the U.S. military for 23 years, 9 years in the Pentagon from 1955 to 1963. He worked closely with many influential people, including Director of Central Intelligence Allen Dulles, General Victor Krulak, and General Edward Lansdale. Colonel Prouty's work centered on special operations, the support of clandestine activities. While in the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he worked with the Office of Cover and Deception. He established and was the first head of the focal point office between the Air Force and the CIA, the chief of Team B. Here are observations he made in 1989 regarding photographs taken in Dealey Plaza.
The photographic evidence as a total at that time is absolutely amazing. What various researchers have done is take all these photographs and place them in a time frame so that you can see where people standing in one place and there's the same person over here and other ones, and begin to identify some of these people. So we've worked very hard on looking carefully at who is in these pictures. There are several of them that are really outstanding, and one of the most amazing is this group of these three men who the news story said had been removed from a boxcar in a rail yard right in back of Dealey Plaza, and were being led from that boxcar by police to the sheriff's office, and that's the end of it. The trail ends. They weren't booked. There's no record of them at all. Well, let's look at the pictures. The pictures do show three men that somebody have called tramps. Well, they got new shoes on. They are not tramps. The police that are leading them, one in front and one in back. One of them has very clearly a hearing device in his ear. And furthermore, the Dallas police don't lead prisoners into the sheriff's office. The police and the sheriff's office work together, but their jobs are entirely different. And in a sense, taking prisoners to the sheriff's office is the last place the police would take any prisoners. So all that part of it is very questionable. So when researchers had arrived at that point, one of them came to me one day and said, look, of all the pictures we've studied, this little episode of these men being marched right across in front of the school book depository building where Oswald was supposed to have been, and across the street by Dealey Plaza where the president's car had just gone, into the sheriff's office. There's something wrong about these pictures. So we looked at them very carefully.
And in the very first picture, in addition to the two policemen and the three tramps, as they're called, is another man. And he's walking in the other direction. But the thing about it is, so that his back is more or less to, or his side and his back is more or less to the photographer rather than face forward. There's something about it is, how is it possible that anyone at Dealey Plaza that day, and here these men are probably being marched across there 5 minutes after the president was killed. Everybody was running around, people were excited, sirens were blowing, and here's this man in a business suit just as casually walking along. He doesn't even turn, he's not looking at anybody, just walking past, and he happens to be standing by these men as they're being marched. The least he would be doing is looking at these prisoners or looking at the policemen. You know, anybody would, especially at that time. This man's looking at nobody. And I recognized immediately that that man is General Lansdale. Now, Lansdale is a very interesting figure in the Kennedy era. And I know Lansdale, I worked with him off and on from about 1952 to 1963. So he retired. Now, this is interesting. He retired from the Air Force on October 31st, 1963. Well, of course, the picture could have been 100 other people, and I could be wrong, but I know him very well. Then I looked at the tramps themselves, and there's this strange little eye catch between this man and the first tramp coming by. In other words, the first tramp, instead of being seriously concerned about the fact that he may be charged with the murder of the president, is smiling. And the second tramp has a sort of a quizzical little look, and you can tell that he has looked at this man walking by, and he has the same kind of approach, you know, as though he's just been reassured everything's all right. The third man happens to be in back from the camera's point of view, and you don't see him at all. But that little bit of expression is saying an awful lot at that moment. The police themselves have expressions that indicate more, that as if they were saying to somebody, say, boss, am I doing all right? You know, that kind of thing. In other words, was Lansdale walking down right in front of the school book depository building to sort of reassure some people here, maybe his employees or somebody that's working for him? What's the significance of that? Well, of course, that happened to be my own interpretation. The men who had brought the pictures to me hadn't the slightest idea who it was, and I decided at that moment that what was needed next was a lot of research. So I got some very clear copies of those professional pictures. These pictures were taken by a professional news cameraman. I got a clear picture. And I started mailing the picture to acquaintances of mine and acquaintances of Lansdale who knew him without any of my thoughts. I simply would send the picture and say, can you tell me what this looks like to you? This was taken shortly after the death of the president, and I wonder if this picture calls anything to mind to you. You'd be amazed to find that from senior people in the government, such as Lansdale was or such as I was at the time, I got immediate confirmation. That said Lansdale. Well, now, I don't know why he was in Dallas. I can't go into that. But it's astounding that this man, who was Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations after General Graves Erskine retired, who was the man who had more or less almost single-handedly set up Diem as President of South Vietnam, who again almost single-handedly had set up President Magsaysay as President of the Philippines, who was considered probably the most significant person in the U.S. military, U.S. government on the subject of counterinsurgency, civic action, special forces, Green Beret troops. He had written the books that the Green Berets used in their courses down at Fort Bragg. What could have been his role at that time? I had a very personal interest in that because only a month or two before that, Lansdale had met me in the halls of the Pentagon and said that he had arranged for me to go as a escort, military escort officer with a VIP party to the South Pole. And it happened that I left for the South Pole on about November 10th or something like that, and that I was in New Zealand on the way back from the South Pole when I heard about President Kennedy being killed. Why, Lansdale asked me to go to the South Pole? I have no idea. Or was there some connection between this role that he may have been playing in Dallas and the fact that he would just as soon I be out of town? And I reflected on that, especially when I began to realize that almost all of Kennedy's cabinet was out of town, that some 45 officials with the cabinet were also out of town in Honolulu and on their way to Tokyo. They were actually on their way to Tokyo when the president was killed. And over the years I have made a study of how many people central to the inner workings of the secret government of this country had been moved out of Washington at that time. It's a very, very interesting subject. I wish I could answer it. I don't know how to answer it. I'm sure the picture is Lansdale. Others are sure it's Lansdale, and I have to leave it there.
Colonel Fletcher Prouty and General Victor Krulak both worked with General Edward Lansdale in the Pentagon. Both men identify him being in Dealey Plaza November 22, 1963. General Lansdale specialized in political psychological warfare operations and manipulation of governments. He worked for Allen Dulles, the Director of Central Intelligence. Although his cover story title was Air Force Colonel and later General, he was always working for the CIA. The photo of him reveals deep involvement with certain members of the CIA in the planning, removal, cover story, and cover-up of the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas on November 22, 1963. Planning and cover story for such manipulation of government personnel was Lansdale's forte. Documents shown here are available at www.prouty.org.
That address again, ladies and gentlemen, is www.prouty.org. That is www.prouty.org. Go there, and you can purchase from Leno Senek all of the interviews that exist and out there, including all the interviews he did with Colonel Prouty. And he's got just hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of video, and not only just audio interviews with him, but video interviews with him as well. And he's got a ton of shows. He's a radio show host, Leno Senek. Most of you know who he is. He's been a guest on my radio broadcast before. Big thank you for that chunk of audio, Len, because that's from him. And it's a plethora of information, a huge archive of everything Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. So research Colonel Prouty. The man knew what he was talking about. Obviously, he knew Ed Lansdale. And like I said, Lansdale comes up in other cases, too, when you start to research things, as do a lot of the other players involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Moving right along, because we have a limited amount of time and a ton of stuff to get out there, I want to move on to what I consider to be the big red flag, which is Oswald couldn't do the shooting. Couldn't do it. Just could not do it. Now, I'm going to play two pieces of audio for you. The first snippet is going to set up the second one. The first one is a piece I cut out from Oliver Stone's movie JFK, and it's the character of Jim Garrison, who's played by Kevin Costner, and one of his investigators, Lou Ivan, and they're up in the book depository, and they're looking out right over Dealey Plaza, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, what's true, what's not true. They're doing a real investigation. Anyway, it's only a few minutes long, but the conversation that they have, everything in that conversation is true. It's not made up. It's not lies. It's true. That's all factual information. And I want you to hear it because it sets up the next clip, which I'm going to follow it up with, which is an episode of 50 Reasons for 50 Years from Leno Senek. And it's about the rifle. Because again, this is another aspect of Oswald couldn't have done the shooting, even if he was an expert marksman, which he was not. But even if he was an expert marksman, the rifle would not allow him to do the shooting. So there is no physical way that Oswald could have done the shooting in their official version. There is no way. And remember, that's a big point, because the official government story hinges on the fact that Oswald is a lone gunman and pulled off 3 shots. 3 shots by himself. Okay? That's the official story. That's why they constantly have to attack anybody that says there's a conspiracy. Oh, and by the way, just so everybody is aware, because I know most people don't realize this, but the House Select Committee on Assassinations found back in the 70s that there was more than enough evidence that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. They didn't name anybody, and that was a whitewash by itself, but they admitted that there was enough evidence to show that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. So anyway, before we run out of time, let me play the audio for you. First, the piece from JFK, the movie, like I said, talking about Dealey Plaza and the shooting, and it's just not making any sense. And then it's going to go into an episode from Leno Senek, 50 Reasons for 50 Years. You can find these episodes over on YouTube either at Conspiracy Scope, or I think it's Conspiracy Scope and the number 2 now. Conspiracy Scope or Conspiracy Scope 2. And Leno Senek's official YouTube channel, Len Osanek. O-S-A-N-I-C. Osanek. Just like it sounds. Spell it out. Anyway, let's get to the audio. Here we go.
The Zapruder film establishes 3 shots in 5.6 seconds. Here. I'm Oswald. Time me.
Go.
Time?
Between 6-7 seconds.
And that's without really aiming. Key is the second and third shots came almost right on top of each other. It takes a minimum 2.3 seconds to recycle this thing. The other problem is there was a tree there, blocking the first 2 shots at the time they occurred in the Zapruder film.
Didn't J. Edgar Hoover say something about that? Leaves are falling off in November?
It was a Texas live oak, Chief. It sheds its leaves the first week of March. So you take this Carcano, world's worst shoulder weapon, and you try to hit a moving target at 88 yards through heavy foliage? No way. Here. FBI tried 2 sets of tests. Not one of their sharpshooters could match Oswald's performance. Not one. And Oswald was at best a medium shot. The scope was defective on it too. I mean, this is the whole essence of the case to me. The guy couldn't do the shooting. Nobody could. And they sold this lemon to the American public.
The Zapruder film is the proof they didn't count on, Lou. We gotta get our hands on it.
That means we have to subpoena Time Live.
Let me ask you something, Lou. Why not just shoot Kennedy coming up Houston? There's plenty of time. He's out in the open.
I know, I keep asking myself the same thing.
It's a frontal shot.
Even if you miss him for the first shot, if it accelerates, you still got him for the second shot. No, the only reason for waiting to get him on Elm is you got him in a triangulated crossfire. Right? You put a team there, down at the fence, for a frontal shot, flat, low trajectory. Put a third team down here in this building here on a low floor. Kennedy gets the kill zone there. It's a turkey shoot.
How many men?
Okay. Not one shooter, said one spotter on a radio, maybe 3 teams. I'd say these are professional riflemen too, Chief. They're serious people. Hunters. Patient. Takes skill to kill with the rifle, Chief. You gotta figure that's why there's been no execution of a chief executive with one in 200 years. 3, 2, 1. Main Street's over there. Right. Original parade route on the way to the trademark.
Mm-hmm.
It's too far, right? Too far. Impossible shot. So they changed the parade route. Bring him down here, moving at a normal 25 miles per hour. They knew the motorcade would have to slow down to about 10 miles per hour to make that turn down, and that's where he got him.
Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Why the Warren Commission may be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public. Now your host, Len Osanek.
In this week's episode, we discuss Commission Exhibit 139. It's a rifle. Model 91/38. Mannlicher Carcano. The Carcano designer was Italian, Salvatore Carcano. Stamped on it, made in Italy. Caliber 6.5, serial number C2766. The Mannlicher Carcano was jokingly called the humanitarian rifle by the Italian army. It earned that nickname because they couldn't kill anyone with it. The cheap scope added by Klein Sporting Goods was awful. The doctored backyard photographs of Lee Oswald with the rifle shows that it had a bottom sling mount. The rifle found in the depository did not. As well, when he was questioned by the Dallas police, Lee told them he didn't own a rifle. The House Select Committee on Assassination's firearms panel test-fired the rifle and could not match its bullets with either CE-399, the magic bullet, or test bullets fired by the FBI from what was allegedly the same rifle, Commission Exhibit 139. That's from Volume 1, page 464 of the House Select Committee hearings. What more do you need? Numerous witnesses to the shooting heard gunshots that were spaced so closely and sounded different from each other that it is not possible that all the shooting could have been done by a bolt-action rifle. Reporters on the scene wrote of hearing automatic weapons fire. An unknown rifle with no scope, no sling, and considerably longer barrel than a Mannlicher Carcano was filmed being taken from the roof of the depository. CBS News, which claimed to duplicate the conditions of the actual assassination in its filmed rifle test in 1967, did not. According to Dan Rather, 11 volunteer marksmen took turns firing clips of 3 bullets each at the moving target. They fired a total of 37 3-round series, 17 of which resulted in unfired bullets due to trouble with the rifle. Governor Jesse Ventura has held the weapon. He's looked through the scope. He's test-fired it. Here are his conclusions of the humanitarian rifle.
This is Governor Jesse Ventura, the host of Conspiracy Theory on True TV. On my TV show, I shot the weapon, the identical weapon that Lee Harvey Oswald was alleged to have used to murder our president, John F. Kennedy. In fact, the bullets that I shot that day, the rounds, even came out of the same group of rounds. They were out of the same boxes that apparently are still available today. And I can tell you this, the weapon is horrible. The telescopic sight was completely useless. It was so thin that in order to focus in on the crosshairs and the amount of time you had to get the shots off was completely impossible. All I could do was get the target in the sight, looking through the telescopic sight, and then squeeze. I couldn't do anything more than that. The other thing that made the shots impossible was working the bolt. Oswald allegedly got the shots off, 3 of them in 6 seconds or thereabouts. I believe the fastest I could work the bolt, get back on target, and get a shot off, starting with 1 shot and recycling it 2 more times. I think the fastest I could do it was the mid-8s, 8.5 seconds.
How fast?
Which is at least 2 seconds slower than allegedly that Oswald did his.
And he did it in 6? Bullshit.
So I don't believe that at all, because when I tried to do it for speed, I wasn't even caring how accurate I was shooting. I was simply trying to recycle the bolt fast enough to equal the speed in which they said Lee Harvey Oswald did it. And I couldn't do it at all.
This is impossible.
I mean, I could do it and pull the trigger. I still couldn't do it fast enough, and without even trying to hit the target, simply get the round off. And so in the end, in light of the telescopic sight, in light of the fact of recycling the weapon, in light of the weapon itself, there is no doubt in my mind that Lee Harvey Oswald could not have fired and used this weapon to kill President John F. Kennedy.
Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock, one of the most decorated combat snipers in United States military history. Hathcock earned 93 confirmed kills in Vietnam and went on to become the senior instructor for the U.S. Marine Corps Sniper Instruction School at Quantico, Virginia. He said, "Let me tell you what we did at Quantico. We reconstructed the whole thing. The angle, the range, the moving target, the time limit, the obstacles, everything. I don't know how many times we tried, but we couldn't duplicate what the Warren Commission said Oswald did. Now, if I can't do it, how in the world could a guy who was non-qual on the rifle range do it?"
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Carlos Whitefeather Hathcock. If you don't know who he is, go look him up. Very famous Marine Corps sniper. The Viet Cong nicknamed him White Feather because he used to carry a white feather in his helmet. They feared him. There were other snipers that were sent out to kill him. Yeah, that didn't work out too well for those other snipers. Hathcock is a legend. The guy is a shooting legend. Anybody that knows anything about shooting at all, rifle shooting, military history, sniping, snipers, knows about Carlos Hathcock. This guy, the legend himself, White Feather, couldn't do the shooting. Does that tell you anything, ladies and gentlemen? Because it should. It really should. It should speak volumes to you. Massive volumes. It should tell you that Oswald could not have done the shooting. And that, in and of itself, is a huge red flag, ladies and gentlemen. One that needs to be looked at. We got a break coming up. When we get back, I got another hour full of information for you. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in 3 short minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from FederalJack.com. Make sure you check out the archive section over on FederalJack.com, by the way. I have, not only do I have a huge radio show archive section with 3 years worth of radio shows if you're new to the broadcast, but I also have a downloadable archive section with ebooks, archives on 9/11, archives on the JFK Assassination, all sorts of videos, tons of information, all my radio shows, all for free. Go check it out. That's what the information is all about. It's about getting it out, helping wake people up. Getting into the next section of tonight's broadcast, we're going to be discussing witnesses and people connected to the JFK assassination and the strange deaths thereof. A lot of people that witnessed the JFK assassination died mysteriously, and a lot of people connected to it died mysteriously. Just very odd circumstances in many, if not all, of these deaths. You know, coincidence? I don't think so. It's more like somebody was cleaning house and cleaning up the mess they made. First, you're going to hear from an old school JFK researcher, one of the very first, Penn Jones Jr. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He passed away in 1998. If he was still around, he'd be 99. Penn was a World War II veteran, fought in almost every major engagement, or I think every major engagement in Europe during World War II. Retired as a captain, and then bought a newspaper in Midlothian, Texas, and proceeded to start being a journalist and, running a newspaper. And in 1963, he started researching the Kennedy assassination. Anyway, you're going to hear an interview done back in the 60s with him by Mark Lane, who is still around today. You have to forgive the audio a little bit. Remember, it was recorded in 1963, so kind of deal with it, but it's worth it to hear Penn Jones Jr., as I said, one of the original JFK assassination researchers who just did not believe what the government was officially telling him. And the other piece you're going to hear is about some of the witnesses, and a major portion of it focuses on the strange death of Lee Bowers. Died in a single car accident all by himself on the side of a highway, and there was nobody around. Right. But there's a little bit more to the story. Anyway, I don't want to waste any more time, so let's get right into it. First, Penn Jones Jr., and then the mysterious death of Lee Bowers.
We are at the office of Penn Jones Jr. in Midlothian, Texas, 25 miles from the Dallas courthouse. For the past 2 years, he alone in the Dallas area has conducted an independent investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy.
Well, I love President Kennedy very much. I was one of the few weekly newspapers that covered the Ruby trial. And my actual investigating did not begin until I started reading the Warren Report and realized that something was very, very much amiss in reading that report. I really believe that the only way you can believe the Warren Report is to not read it.
Have you found it difficult to uncover the facts this time?
Yes, it's very difficult. Witnesses are reluctant. Some of them have gone into hiding, or at least cannot be found by me. And in many cases, the police have actually told, or in some witnesses say, federal authorities have told them not to talk about the assassination. The witnesses are frightened. Some of them went into hiding. I'm sure that I spent at least 1 month searching for Earlene Roberts. And I don't know of any person, any newsman, or any investigator that talked to Earlene Roberts after she testified before the Warren Commission. And her testimony was quite startling. Now, of course, she is dead. And she's not the only one. There are at least 8 persons now dead, either from murder or at least strange deaths, who were closely related to Jack Ruby or Lee Harvey Oswald.
Can you give us one instance of a witness who died a strange death?
Well, let's take the case of Betty Mooney McDonald, one of Jack Ruby's strippers. A fellow named Warren Reynolds saw a man running from the scene of the Tippit slaying. Shortly thereafter, Reynolds was shot through the head. Now, before Reynolds was shot, he could not identify the man running from the scene as Oswald. Then he was shot through the head, and a fellow named Garner was arrested. Then McDonald was the alibi for Garner. She said Garner could not have shot Reynolds because he was with me at the time. 2 days after her alibi, Betty Mooney McDonald was arrested for fighting with a roommate, although the roommate was not arrested. McDonald was put in jail that night, and an hour later she was found hanged in her cell. And of course the Dallas police said she hung herself.
Did Reynolds finally testify before the commission?
After Reynolds recovered from his wound, he testified and was able to identify Oswald. That's one of the examples, and there are many others. Bill Hunter was shot through the heart in the police station out in Long Beach, California. Jim Cody on the Times Herald was killed by a karate chop to the throat in his apartment in Dallas. And the man that was the most likely suspect was not even indicted for the murder. The death of Tom Howard is a very strange one. They said he died of an apparent heart attack. There was no autopsy. But I know personally that Tom Howard was acting very strangely 3 days before he died. I and other people who saw him felt like that he was very frightened. 3 days later, he was dead. Now, he was the man who saw Jack Ruby first after the killing of Oswald.
Well, whether these deaths are related to the assassination or not, does the fact that witnesses have died in this fashion tend to make it more difficult to secure statements from those witnesses who have survived?
Certainly, there is very little evidence, first-hand evidence left with the erasing of the lives of Tippit and Oswald and these other people who had first-hand conversations with either Ruby or Oswald. That has made the gathering of evidence very difficult. And the continued threats on these people who still have evidence makes them hesitant to talk, and it makes anyone trying to do investigative work very, very difficult. I would love to see a computer faced with the problem of coming up with the probabilities of the assassination taking place the way it did, with all of these strange incidents that took place before and are continuing to take place after the assassination. I think all of us who love this country should be alerted that something is wrong in the land.
Of the hundreds of witnesses around Dealey Plaza that day, one was in a unique position to see what was going on behind the wooden fence atop the grassy knoll. When questioned, Railroad Supervisor Lee Bowers gave the Warren Commission intriguing testimony. But did Lee Bowers die before he told the complete story of what he saw?
He was in the tower behind the wooden fence, the only person back there who had the right to be there, who wasn't planning to kill the president, so far as we know.
This is an aerial view of Dealey Plaza. The president's limousine was here when the fatal shot was fired. This is the Texas School Book Depository, where Lee Oswald worked. And this is the stockade fence and the grassy knoll. It is here that assassination witnesses and researchers have long believed at least one gunman was hidden, the gunman who fired the shot that killed the president.
Where were you employed on November 22nd, 1963?
At that time, I was employed as a tower operator for the Union Terminal Company.
At 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, Lee Bowers was here in this railroad tower. From this window, he could see the motorcade's progress on Elm Street, and he had an unobstructed view of the wooden fence atop the grassy knoll. After the assassination, Bowers tried to tell the Warren Commission what he saw that day, but like many other witnesses, he was cut off. However, in this 1966 interview with Mark Lane, he was able to finish part of what he had begun to say years earlier.
There was some unusual occurrence, a flash of light or smoke or something which caused me to feel like something out of the ordinary had occurred there.
On a railroad overpass adjacent to the grassy knoll stood a number of train workers whose testimony confirmed Bowers' observations.
Well, we all four seen about the same thing.
At the time, I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like a loud firecracker or a gunshot. And it sounded like it came from the left and in front of us, towards the wooden fence. And there was a puff of smoke that came underneath the trees.
Is there any doubt in your mind that that shot came from behind the fence?
There's no doubt in my mind.
The Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots at the president, all originating from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. But Robert Groden, co-author of the bestseller High Treason and photographic consultant to the House Assassinations Committee, is one of many who disagree.
We have the ear witnesses. We have the medical evidence. It's all consistent. Every bit of evidence in every field shows that at least 2 shots came from the right front, from the area of the stockade fence.
4 months after this interview was filmed, Lee Bowers died or was killed in broad daylight on this remote Texas highway.
Lee Bowers was heading west here on Highway 67, heading from Midlothian down to Cleburne. And according to an eyewitness, he was driven off the road by a black car, drove him into this bridge abutment. He didn't die immediately. He held on for 4 hours, and during that time he was talking to the ambulance people and told them that he felt he had been drugged when he stopped for coffee back there a few miles in Midlothian.
But why would Lee Bowers have been killed when it seemed that he had already told all he knew? Walter Rochelle was a friend of Lee's and of his late brother Monty. Rochelle says Lee Bowers was afraid to tell all he witnessed during the assassination. Rochelle told the explosive story to now investigative reporter Maury Terry in an exclusive interview in Dealey Plaza.
He said he saw a car pull up. 2 men get out of the car. They were carrying what appeared to be rifles. He said that one gunman apparently positioned himself either on their car or on a car. The other one, I don't recall where he said he was. He said he saw both men fire shots. He could tell by the smoke, the puffs of smoke that came from the rifles.
You're saying that Lee Bowers told you that he saw both men fire?
Yes, he did.
Bowers also told his minister that he had seen more than he told publicly. In addition, legendary Texas journalist Penn Jones Jr., one of the first to challenge the official version of the assassination, says he also heard the complete Bowers story.
He is the man who said he saw gunmen firing at the president from their hidden positions. He didn't see all of them, but he saw 2 of them that were firing at the president.
Later, another witness who wasn't questioned by the Warren Commission, a deaf-mute named Ed Hoffman, said he too observed 2 men behind the fence and saw at least 1 shot fired. Further, acoustics tests conducted by the House Assassinations Committee determined that at least 1 shot was almost certainly fired from the knoll. So why was Bowers so afraid to tell the full story? Walter Rochelle provides a possible answer.
Lee had disappeared for about 2 days, one night I know for sure, which was very uncharacteristic of him. And when he came back, one of his fingers was missing on one of his hands. So Lee gave Monty some excuse for what had happened, which Monty didn't accept, so he called the local hospitals, the clinics, and some doctors' offices, and there was no record of anyone, certainly not Lee, going in and having that taken care of.
And shortly after this alleged disappearance and mysterious maiming, Lee Bowers died in that suspicious automobile wreck.
At the time I was in Monty's office, he was quite upset because the insurance company had refused to pay the claim. I can't recall too vividly, but I believe that Monty felt that the insurance company did not believe that his death was accidental.
If Lee Bowers' death was not accidental, what was it? Joining me now, Craig Rivera. What was it?
We don't really know because the death certificate is missing.
What about the official autopsy?
There's no autopsy either.
So if he didn't die by accident, did somebody kill this guy?
It could very well be. And there's also some more evidence that backs up what Lee Bowers told Walter Rochelle.
You mean about the gunman from the grassy knoll?
That's right. 3 railroad workers who also saw a puff of smoke and heard what they thought were gunshots ran down to the area, the wooden fence behind the grassy knoll, and they found cigarette butts on the ground, footprints in the mud, and also mud on the bumper of a car. And that indicates that somebody could have stood up on that car overlooking the grassy knoll.
There are definitely a lot of strange deaths connected to the Kennedy assassination. Witnesses, researchers, people that were connected to people that were connected to the assassination. Very strange indeed. We have a few short minutes left, and I want to, before we run out of time, I want to play one more clip before the half-hour break comes up. And on the other side of the break coming back, as I said, and I will go a little bit further into detail in a second, I will not be speaking at all next segment. Next segment you are going to be hearing from Jim Garrison, the district attorney who took Clay Shaw to trial over the assassination of President Kennedy. You know, Jim Garrison's been dead for a while now, but I have audio of when he was on NBC, and I will explain that in a little bit more detail right before I play the clip. But anyway, I want to get into another story really quick before we run out of time, and that is the story of Rose Cherami. Because, again, it destroys the narrative that Oswald was a lone gunman. It shows without a shadow of a doubt that there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. So, here we go. This is the story of Rose Cherami.
They're gonna kill Kennedy.
Through the credit sequence of Oliver Stone's JFK, we get, in segments, the story of a woman who's thrown out of a car, abandoned, ends up in a hospital, and warns the people in attendance that President Kennedy is about to be killed in Dallas. She says that these are serious men and somebody has to do something. What not very many viewers realize is that this story was absolutely true, and it was investigated by Jim Garrison, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and now the Review Board has released more documents on this remarkable story of this woman who 3 days in advance predicted that President Kennedy would be killed in Dallas. On November the 20th, 1963, Louise Guillory, a hospital director at Moussa General Hospital, called State Trooper Francis Fruget, who worked in narcotics detail. She told him that they had a patient at the hospital who was under the influence. Fruget went over and found a woman named Rose Cherami in the waiting room outside the emergency ward. Moussa was a private hospital, so Fruget had to arrange to have her transferred and also to receive a sedative. On the way to the state hospital at Jackson, Louisiana, Rose Cherami began to relate her remarkable story. She was en route from Florida to Dallas as part of a drug deal with two other men who were Cubans. Rose Cherami was to function as a courier of funds for heroin, which was to be dropped off to her by a seaman coming into the port of Galveston. From there, the three were to proceed to Mexico. At a seedy bar en route called the Silver Slipper Lounge, an argument ensued, and Rose was roughly abandoned by her friends who threw her out. Then while hitching a ride, she was hit by a car driven by a man named Frank Odom. Odom had delivered her to Moussa Hospital, where she was picked up by Fruget. While on the way to Jackson, Rose told Fruget that in Dallas, the men had planned to kill Kennedy. According to several witnesses at the hospital, on November the 22nd, Rose again predicted the assassination before it happened. She also told the doctor there that she knew that both Ruby and Oswald had known each other and she had seen them together at Ruby's club. Fruget later also confirmed that she had worked for Jack Ruby. Another employee at the hospital, an intern named Wayne Owen, told his local newspaper in Wisconsin that he and other interns were told of the plot in advance of the assassination. He said that they even heard that one of the men involved was Jack Rubenstein, which was Jack Ruby's real name. Rose also told of that association with Ruby to Dr. Victor Weiss at Jackson Hospital. After the assassination, Fruget told the House Select Committee that he demanded to see Rose Cherami again to interview her. She told him that her two companions actually seemed to be part of the conspiracy rather than just aware of it. Fruget then had her story about the drug deal checked out by both local and federal authorities. Fruget then had his superior, Colonel Morgan, call up Captain Will Fritz of the Dallas Police to offer Rose as a witness to his investigation. Morgan told Fruget after the call that Fritz was not interested. So, a potentially explosive witness was now turned away in 1963. In 1967, Jim Garrison received several leads about Rose Cherami from people related to the Jackson Hospital, which is about 3 hours north of New Orleans. This included a friend of Dr. Victor Weiss, a man named A.H. Magruder. Garrison tracked down Fruget, deputized him, and then asked him to find Cherami. Fruget found out that she had died in a car accident in 1965. Fruget told the House Select Committee in the next decade that he then found the Silver Slipper Lounge, where Rose had become separated from her two friends in 1963. He found the bartender in attendance the night Rose had walked in. The man's name was Mac Manuel. Fruget displayed the manual several photos of suspects from the Garrison investigation. Manuel picked out the two men he had seen with Rose Cherami that night. This is significant because, as we now know, both Cubans were at Guy Bannister's office in New Orleans, and they both knew David Ferry and Clay Shaw. So now, according to this verified Cherami story, we have a connection between New Orleans and Texas, just days prior to the murder.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I felt it important for you all to hear the story of Rose Cherami. coming up, we got the break in a few short minutes, and I want to explain what's going to happen when we come back on the other side. I'm not going to bring it back in. Okay, I'm not going to, bring it in from break and say, ladies and gentlemen, we're back, blah, blah, blah. For lack of time, because of the length of the clip, I'm going to let it pick up right where the clip starts, coming back in from break, and it's going to go right into the end of the broadcast, right, pretty much about halfway through the outro, because that's the full length of the broadcast. But I think it's imperative that you all hear it. And the broadcast is that of District Attorney Jim Garrison. It's from July 15th, 1967. It's in response to their June 19th, 1967, hour-long, quote, analysis of New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's investigation, titled The JFK Conspiracy, The Case of Jim Garrison. Now, I don't have to rehash the whole case, but he was focusing on three main characters, Garrison's investigation: David Ferry, Guy Bannister, and Clay Shaw. And it was big news, and predictably the news media swung into attack mode to defend their masters. And none was more vicious or had more resources at their disposal at the time than NBC. Now I want to read you something from a recently released FBI memo. A local FBI agent reported that Richard Townley, WDSU-TV, New Orleans, remarked to a special agent of the New Orleans office last evening that he had received instructions from NBC, New York, to prepare a 1-hour TV special on Jim Garrison with the instruction, quote, shoot him down, end quote. After the program aired, Garrison petitioned the FCC, who agreed that the program was biased and granted Garrison a 30-minute rebuttal to air on July 15th at 7:30 p.m. Hardly equal time considering they had an hour to attack him and he only had a half hour to respond. Nevertheless, the NBC program aided greatly in discrediting the DA's office, and it potentially contaminated Clay Shaw's jury pool. So the mission was done, and they still do this kind of thing to this very day. 50 years later, they still do this type of chicanery. So coming back in on the other side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Jim Garrison pick it up, and for the last half hour you're going to hear from District Attorney Jim Garrison and his response from July 15th, 1967, in full, uninterrupted. Anyway, we're running up to the break, so stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back on the other side, we'll be picking it up with former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison from July 15th, 1967. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, by the way, because I have to say goodbye to you all now because you won't be hearing from me the final segment. So I want to say thank you all for tuning in and listening. And make sure you stay tuned for the next half hour and listen to what District Attorney Jim Garrison had to say all the way back in 1967. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I love you all, and I'll see you all again tomorrow night. And like I said, make sure you stay tuned on the other side of the break for District Attorney Jim Garrison.
The following time period has been made available to District Attorney Jim Garrison of New Orleans to reply to an NBC News program broadcast on June 19th. In that program, NBC News examined some of the methods used by Mr. Garrison in his investigation of what he charges was a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. Except for the opening and closing announcements, this program has been prepared under Mr. Garrison's sole supervision. Mr. Garrison.
Tonight I'm going to talk to you about truth and about fairy tales, about justice and about injustice. In the months to follow, you're going to learn that many of the things which some of the major news agencies have been telling you are untrue. You're going to learn that although you are citizens of the United States, information concerning the cause of the death of your president has been withheld from you. In the months to come, you will learn to your own satisfaction that President Kennedy was not killed by a lone assassin. You will learn that there has been and continues to be a concerted effort to keep you from learning these facts. And you will learn, I assure you, that what I have been trying to tell you and what I'm telling you tonight is true. As children, we become accustomed to hearing fairy tales. They're always pleasant stories, and they're comforting to hear because good always triumphs over evil. At least, this is the way it is in fairy tales. Fairy tales are not dangerous for our children, and are probably even good for them up to a point. However, in the real world in which you and I must live, fairy tales are dangerous. They're dangerous because they're untrue. Anything which is untrue is dangerous. And it is all the more dangerous when a fairy tale becomes accepted as reality simply because it has an official seal of approval, or because honorable men announce that you must believe it, or because powerful elements of the press tell you that the fairy tale is true. The conclusion of the Warren Report that President Kennedy was killed by a lone assassin is a fairy tale. This does not mean that the men on the Warren Commission were aware at the time that their conclusion was totally untrue, nor does it mean necessarily that these men had any sinister motives. It does mean that the conclusion that no conspiracy existed and that Lee Oswald was the lone assassin is a fiction and a myth, and that it should be brought to an end. The people of this country don't have to be protected from the truth. This country was not built on the idea that a handful of nobles, whether located in our federal agencies in Washington, D.C., or in the news agencies in New York, should decide what was good for the people to know and what they should not know. This is a totalitarian concept which presumes that the leaders of our federal government and the men in control of the powerful press media constitute a special elite, which by virtue of their nobility and their brilliance empower them to think for the people. Personally, I would rather put my confidence in the common sense of the people of this country. The truth about the assassination of the president has been concealed from you long enough. Those forces which are fighting so hard today to tell you that they have examined the Warren Report and that everything is fine and that our investigation has uncovered nothing, are not merely going to lose this fight, they have already lost it. Now let me tell you why President Kennedy was murdered and how he was murdered. I also want to give you a few examples which will show you how the conclusion reached by the Warren Commission is totally impossible. President Kennedy was assassinated by men who sought to obtain a radical change in our foreign policy, particularly with regard to Cuba. You recall that under President Kennedy, the Cold War began to thaw, and there were new signs of an effort on the part of the Soviet Union and ourselves to understand each other. On the map, this appears to be merely a large island off the coast of Florida. But for many men, it meant a good deal more than this. In 1963, a great variety of interests existed which not only desired an American-supported invasion of Castro's Cuba, but took it for granted that it was inevitable. In the minds of many men, this island represented a tremendous emotional landmark because they had steered their courses toward it for so long and with such intensity. In the fall of 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. It was followed by a pronounced new attitude towards Cuba on the part of the United States. Cuba, after this, was no longer regarded as an enemy and was no longer regarded as fair game for those men who, for one reason or another, focused their attention on this island. The new signs of understanding between Russia and the United States continued to develop. In June of 1963, President Kennedy, addressing students at the American University in Washington, told them, "We breathe the same air as the Russians." He said, "We should try to live together in peace on this earth." Well, at this point, some individuals transferred their hostile attention from Fidel Castro to John F. Kennedy. They planned the president's assassination, and they planned it well. The evidence indicates that he was shot at from two different directions in the rear, and also from the right front. We know that shooting was coming from two separate directions in the rear because the President and Governor Connolly were hit in the back within a split second of each other. And this necessarily had to happen with two bullets coming from two different rifles. We know that the President was being shot at from the grassy knoll area on the right front because most of the people in Dealey Plaza heard the shots coming from there. And because at least one of the President's wounds was an entry wound from the front. And because men were seen running from the grassy knoll area immediately afterwards. That's why the idea of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin of the President is a fairy tale and should be brought to an end. If you, the people of the United States, will learn the truth that the President was assassinated by men who were once connected with a Central Intelligence Agency, of course, this might reflect on the dignity of the CIA. But I happen to believe that our form of government is strong enough to survive the truth. I believe that you are entitled to the truth about how your President was shot down in the street and how it was done. Instead, some of the most powerful news agencies we have in our country have worked hard to convince you that everything is all right. They do not tell you that Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints were not found on the gun, which was supposed to have killed the President. And they do not tell you that nitrate tests exonerated Lee Oswald from the actual shooting by showing that he had not fired a rifle that day. And they do not tell you that it was virtually impossible for Oswald to have taken his fingerprints off the gun, hidden the gun, and gone down 4 flights of stairs by the time he was seen on the 2nd floor. Above all, they do not tell you of the overwhelming eyewitness testimony that shots were coming from behind the stone wall on the grassy knoll. In a choice between official dignity and the truth, dignity was given priority, and so you have not received the full truth. This is why there continue to be hundreds of documents still hidden from your eyes and classified as secret, and some of them bear such titles as Lee Harvey Oswald's accessibility to information about the U-2, the Central Intelligence Agency's dossier on Lee Harvey Oswald, and the CIA file on Jack Ruby. You have not been told that Lee Oswald was in the employ of United States intelligence agencies, but this was the case, and so I am telling you. Why, this young, uneducated man had learned to speak Russian even before he left the Marines, and there's only one way he could have learned that. Oswald had a higher security rating than his buddies in his Marine unit. During 12 hours of questioning, to give you another example, 12 hours of questioning after the assassination, there is no transcript of Oswald's statements available for you to look at. Now, it doesn't matter where you live. If somebody in your town steals a 1928 Hupmobile, what he says is written down when he's questioned. However, when the man who has just killed the President of the United States is questioned for 12 hours, no transcript is available. There's nothing for you to look at. And believe it or not, one of the explanations given is that the room was too small to include a stenographer. And here's something else. This case has more accidental fires, more burning of paper than any murder case in history. For example, when Oswald was questioned by a federal agent in August of 1963, the notes of the interview were later burned. You cannot see the notes made by Commander Humes concerning the President's autopsy because he burned them too. One of the questioners of Lee Harvey Oswald during the 12-hour session burned his notes. And similarly, when the Warren Commission contacted the State Department and said, with regard to Exhibit 948, we noticed that a one-page message from the CIA containing secret information is supposed to be attached to this file, and it's missing. Would you please furnish us with a copy of this missing secret document? The answer given to the Warren Commission was that the secret message about Oswald from the CIA was accidentally destroyed while being thermofaxed. This spontaneous combustion, incidentally, occurred the day after the president's assassination. I'm not even going to bother to dignify the foolishness which Newsweek and NBC and some of the other news agencies have tried to make you believe about my office. I've been district attorney of New Orleans for more than 5 years, and we have never had a single case reversed because of improper methods on the part of our staff. Nor do we rush to judgment on half-baked evidence. And the proof of that is the fact that in more than 5 years, not one defendant has walked out of the courtroom in a murder case with an acquittal. Nor have we lost a major case in 5 years. Then what is their game? Their game is to fool you. These people want the investigation stopped. They don't want a trial at all. Please believe me, they don't think we're wrong in our investigation. Obviously, if our investigation was as haywire as they would like to have you think, then you would not see such a coordinated barrage coming from the news centers in the East. Why are they so concerned? Why is it that they cannot wait until the trial comes in order to learn what the facts are? Why are they so anxious to have their own trials? They know very well that the witnesses they're presenting to you have not been testifying under oath, that they're not being cross-examined as they would be at a trial, and that the opportunities for timely rebuttal by the state of Louisiana, which would exist at a trial, have not been provided in their untrue presentations. They know this. In my considered judgment, there has been an effort to prejudice in advance the potential jurors in the trial of this case. As a matter of fact, the National Broadcasting Company has already had the trial. The defendant was found innocent, and the district attorney was convicted. They announced across the nation that my methods were improper. But as their stories, one by one, turn out to be false, they do not reveal this to you, but simply search hopefully into new areas. For example, Newsweek magazine had a feature article saying that my office attempted to bribe a man named Boba. It later turned out that his story and their article was totally untrue, and the tape which Newsweek described had been altered. The police investigators in my office were found innocent of any wrongdoing in a serious investigation conducted by the police department. However, Newsweek has made virtually no mention of that. Similarly, in its recent effort to make you think that my methods are improper, NBC announced coast to coast that it had located the real Clay Bertrand, that an NBC man had talked to him. This made every newspaper in the country, and it inferred once again that in addition to using terrible methods, we were off on a wild goose chase. Now, when it turned out that this was a total fabrication, and the man whom NBC identified as the real Clay Bertrand hotly denied ever using the name, there was only coast-to-coast silence from NBC. NBC presented a professional burglar whom my office had just recently convicted and allowed him to make a plainly false presentation that we had tried to get him to climb into the defendant's apartment and plant evidence there. The inference, of course, was that this particular defendant was too lofty a character to participate in my nefarious schemes. However, recently, when we called him before the New Orleans grand jury so that he could tell all about our new venture into the burglary business, he took the Fifth Amendment when asked if his statement on NBC was true. Once again, this was followed by loud silence from coast to coast on NBC. As a matter of fact, the Warren Commission's inquiry into the assassination started off with a completely unacceptable philosophy for a democracy like ours. One of its stated objectives was to calm the fears of the people about a conspiracy. But in our country, the government has no right to calm our fears. any more than it has, for example, the right to excite our fears about Red China or about fluoridation or about birth control or about anything. There's no room in America for thought control of any kind, no matter how benevolent the objective. Personally, I don't want to be calm about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I don't want to be calm about a president of my country being shot down in the street. And I don't want to be calm about the fact that for reasons of public policy or national security or any other phony reason, the true facts have been withheld from the people of this country. If the day has come when it is possible to shoot our president down because some men disagree with his foreign policy, and the day has come that the moment his heart stops beating, other considerations take over which conceal the total truth from the citizens of the United States, then the day has come when we have ceased to be a democracy. I cannot believe that this is so, that the time has come in America when the people no longer control their country. Yet I must confess that I'm appalled by the readiness with which some of the major press media have accepted the great fairy tale without hesitation, rousing from their stupor only when they have learned that a district attorney was violating all the rules of etiquette and digging up the truth. They're telling you that black is white when they tell you there is no evidence of a conspiracy. They have to know well the significance of the continued concealment of X-rays and autopsy pictures, which, if revealed to you, would show that the president was hit by rifle fire from more than one direction. And they have to know well of the hundreds of documents which remain classified secret and concealed from your view. And they're making white black when they repeatedly state that my office is using improper methods. They have to know that no DA's office in the United States would dream of operating in the way they suggest. They have to know that for years I have been a strong defender of the rights of individuals. They have to know all of this. But they have lent themselves to the all-out effort to convince you that the matter's been looked into, and anyone who raises a question now is irresponsible or a troublemaker or an enemy of the people. What's that? You say that you are an American citizen and you want to see the autopsy X-rays and you want to see these hundreds of documents that have been withheld from your view, and you want to know why these vital notes always ended up being burned? What's the matter with you? Can't you take the word of these honorable men who've looked into it for you? Let me just give you one example that shows you how impossible the single assassination theory is, which shows you the enormity of the fairy tale which you're supposed to believe in. Now, this is the Warren Commission's own diagram of the route of the bullet through Governor Connally. The bullet had to take this route in order to cause the injuries which he received. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that the Warren Commission itself concedes that if this same bullet was not the one which also went through President Kennedy, then there had to be someone else firing. And the reason for that, just to put it very simply, is that the Zapruder films have shown that all the firing occurred in 6 seconds, and yet there were a total of 8 wounds. Therefore, this one bullet has to cause 7 wounds, because one missed and one was the fatal shot hitting the president. So, by the Warren Commission's own admission, prior to hitting the governor, this bullet had to go through President Kennedy, who is sitting back here. Now, you'll notice that the Warren Commission did not attempt to include President Kennedy in the diagram. They could not, because the total impossibility of this bullet having gone through the president also would be too obvious. In other words, by the evidence of the Warren Commission itself, it is obvious that there was other shooting going on in Dealey Plaza. Consequently, the Warren Commission has officially concluded that before this bullet came down from the sky, as it had to hit Governor Connally and all those different places, it entered President Kennedy's body from the rear and came out of his neck. I might add that the Warren Commission did not try to include the president's picture because that would have shown that the course of the magic bullet would have had to gone up in the air and come down again in order to end up hitting the governor. It is by selecting these little portions of each incident and by excluding other portions that the fairy tale is presented to you. However, if they had to show in one diagram the bullet entering the president and then continuing through Governor Connally, you would be able to see the total impossibility of this bullet causing 7 wounds. Now, this is just one of many examples which show that the Warren Commission's conclusion is completely impossible. The bullet 399 is another example. The fact that the cartridges in the Tippett case do not match at all the bullets in Tippett's body, one after the other. If I had the total hour to reply, which NBC used to try and discredit my office, I would be able to go into more matters. But let's sum it up by saying that it is completely impossible to uphold the single assassin theory if you look at it seriously. Anyone who has done their homework knows that the single assassin theory is totally impossible. In the final analysis, what has been done by the Warren Commission in its investigation is to take this series of implausibilities and to attempt to prove to you that each one of them is at least mathematically possible. Each one of them is mathematically possible, but not probable. However, it is not mathematically possible for all of these series of implausibilities to have occurred. And this is what they ask you to believe. It's very much like telling you that it is mathematically possible, for example, for an elephant to hang from a cliff with his tail tied to a daisy. Of course, this is implausible. But what do? They produce an expert who says, yes, I have made a study of the situation, and this is not a full-grown elephant, and this is a particularly tough kind of daisy, and therefore it was mathematically possible. Now, the official truth, as a result of such expert testimony, as a result of the creation of a series of mathematical possibilities, is now no longer what actually happened in Dallas, but what has been officially approved. Well, I say that the matter is not closed, not in this country. I say that the day has not yet arrived when the only reality is power, and the ideals on which our country was built are merely words printed on paper. I believe that those news agencies which have sought to imply that I would use improper methods to gain some sort of fictional political advantage have simply revealed their own cynicism. I believe that in this conflict between truth and power, and this is exactly what it is all about, that power cannot possibly smash truth out of existence. The people in this country will not let that happen. If we still live in the same country in which we were born, and I don't think it's changed that much, if this is still the country in which, in the words of our Pledge of Allegiance, there exists liberty and justice for all, then this attempt to conceal the full truth from you, in the end, has to be a failure. Now, in this case, I've learned more about the human race than I really wanted to know. And I've learned more about some of our government agencies than I really wanted to know. And I've learned more about some of our press agencies than I cared to know. But I am still naive enough to believe that in America, the people make the decisions, not a handful of men in the Washington and New York areas. And I believe that the people of America want to know the entire truth about how their president was shot down in the streets of Dallas. And I want to assure you that as long as I am alive, no one is going to stop me from seeing that you obtain the full truth, and nothing less than the full truth, and no fairy tales.